Hi, I'm James Gardner, host of Your History, Your Story, a podcast for everybody who loves stories about interesting people and events told by those who uncovered them from within their own family trees. This, we hope, will inspire you to discover and celebrate your history and your story. On Christmas Eve, 1741, a small group of Moravian settlers gathered together in a house at the confluence of the Monocacy and Lehigh rivers in what was then the colony of Pennsylvania. It was on that night that their leader, Count Nikolaus Zinzendorf, decided to name their new home Bethlehem, after the birthplace of Jesus. Over the years, the Moravian settlement grew into a thriving religious and economic community that eventually became known as Christmas City. In this episode of Your History, Your Story, our guest is Craig Larimer. Craig is a lifelong resident of Bethlehem and a member of the Central Moravian Church, where he serves on the church's communications committee. Craig will talk about Bethlehem's rich history and why his hometown means so much to him. He'll also tell of the many sites and events that make Bethlehem, Pennsylvania a wonderful place to visit, especially at Christmas time. I'd now like to welcome Craig Larimer to our show. Welcome, Craig.
Good morning, James. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Well, I'm excited about this interview, as I am with many of my interviews, or all my interviews, but this one's got a special place for me because it is about Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and I have a connection to that city. I went to Moravian College, which is now Moravian University, right?
Correct. That is absolutely correct.
I went there a long time ago. I was there in the late 70s, but also my wife and I go there pretty much every Christmas time and enjoy the many things that that city has to offer. So thank you for being a guest. And also last month, my wife Kelly and I came out and visited with you, and you gave us a wonderful tour. And we're going to talk about some of those places that we toured on this podcast. So tell us about your background and how are you tied in with the city of Bethlehem and the Moravian Church?
Yeah, I'm going to try to make this brief, but it's 55 years. Born in Bethlehem, I went to elementary school in Bethlehem, high school in Bethlehem. I married a girl from Bethlehem. She actually grew up not far from us, raised a family here. We have two incredible sons, 28 and 24, Ian and Evan. And we're married at the old chapel, Central Moravian Church. I married into the Moravian Church and just so happy to be here. It's a beautiful place. If you've not been, you've been, you and Kelly have been, but it's a beautiful place, surrounded by rivers and creeks and green things and parks and events and activities, and we just love to call it home, and we're proud to call it home. So looking forward to talking more about all of that.
So Bethlehem, Pennsylvania is a place that has become known as the Christmas City. So I mentioned just a moment ago that my wife Kelly and I went out there with you and we toured around, and you kind of took us through a lot of the early Bethlehem history, the Moravians and people who came and founded that town. Let's talk about who were the Moravians, where did they come from, and how did Bethlehem, Pennsylvania get its name?
Well, that's a loaded question, and that requires a thorough answer. The Moravians actually were looking to escape a religious persecution from Bohemia and Moravia, which is now the Czech Republic. And were led by John Huss, who was very interested in having the message of Christ told in the language of the people. And that stirred up some trouble with the Catholics in the area. So they kind of branched off and started their own thing and started their own religion, started the Moravian religion, and faced a lot of pressure, and were looking to escape that pressure and fled. So they hopped on a few boats, settled first in Georgia and tried to make a go of it there. Didn't work out, traveled further north, and eventually settled in what we now know as Bethlehem. So they were led at the time by Count Nikolaus von Zinzendorf, and it was a group of about 20 settlers who colonized. They built a very modest house, the first house, a log cabin, just east of the Monocacy Creek up the hill, which is now where the Hotel Bethlehem is. And on Christmas Eve in 1741, they considered the name of the colony and decided what better name than the birthplace of Christ, and named the place Bethlehem.
Yes, and when we went on that tour with you, we saw there's actually a plaque on the corner of Hotel Bethlehem that says that this is where the actual house stood, where on Christmas Eve, 1741, Bethlehem got its name. I couldn't help but think when we stood there, Craig, what it would have been like in that house on that night, and who was there? What did they look like? What was it like being in this sort of raw, sort of frontier sort of place, and bringing their faith with them, and how important that was to them? So important is that they named their new settlement Bethlehem. That's kind of cool to think about that, isn't it?
Yeah, and what you're left with is speculation. I mean, I imagine the journey, first of all, the journey from Europe, the journey from England is about 3,000 miles. So you think about that. So these people traveled for longer than a month on a boat. I mean, that would galvanize you or separate you or frustrate you, but I think because of their faith and because of their strong connection and their purpose and their ambition, it motivated them and made them stronger together. They had a sense of community before they left, and they retained that sense of community, and perhaps it grew on the journey. And, you know, with the faith and with the music and with the culture and with the attitude and the Moravian spirit, which is still with us today, it must have been incredible. I mean, just their sense of adventure and pioneering spirit, and it was out of necessity. But they were looking for something better and a fresh start, and in a place where they were comfortable. And, you know, at the confluence between the Monocacy Creek and the Lehigh River, it was a smart place to be. Arriving when they arrived and living at that particular time, I mean, it had to be extremely challenging to build everything from scratch, to hunt and to forage and to feed yourself. I mean, they had the creek, they had the river, they had places to fish, they had places to grow. It was fertile land. These people were pioneers. These people were creative. They were innovative. They were craftsmen, and they were inventive. And it's that part of the religion that we celebrate as much as the message of Christ. So I can only speculate, but I imagine that it looked a lot like a bunch of people just trying to get along and doing whatever they could to make a better life for themselves in between 13 and 20 people originally, not a big group, but very, very shortly, it grew and developed into something rather significant.
Yeah, I'll say, you know, when you mentioned about community, their sense of community, also their resourcefulness, and in fact, what they were facing, but they went in sort of prepared. I'm sure that served them very well. I remember reading about the Jamestown settlement and how a lot of the men who came over in the initial wave of that settlement were considered gentlemen. That was their occupation. And some of them couldn't, you know, nail two boards together, I guess. That didn't serve them too well. But with the Moravians, you had a lot of resourcefulness. They were used to community. They were based on community. That was very important. And it served them because, now let me go back to when I was in Moravian college back in the late 70s. And I would walk down by the South Campus, right by the Hotel Bethlehem, looking down the hill there. I saw these old buildings, just like some of them were just sort of foundations, a little bit sticking out. And then there were other buildings that were more whole. I'm thinking back a long time now. But I remember reading some sorts of signs saying that one was like a mill, a tannery, and a couple other things, that there was really a sort of an industrial area there. And thankfully, I'm coming back now 40 years later, and I'm seeing that many of those structures have been, I want to use the right term. Is it restored? Is that the right way?
Yes, that is the right
I'll say
way.
that's right. I want to say restored. They really are amazing. But really what it was showing me when you and I went on the tour with Kelly is that There was quite the little industrial area that these Moravians they were serious about staying there and thriving. Can you sort of, I think before we start with the industrial part, let me back up a little bit. Let's talk about the Christian roots of the Moravians. And I believe that one of the most important things to do was for them to establish a place of worship. Can you tell us about how the Moravians initially started worshiping and where, and how that progressed throughout the years?
I think they were accustomed to being together and celebrating life. And, we mentioned this sense of community. So I don't necessarily think that it was always about the place, although having a place of worship is important and a place to gather. But if you had a modest setting, a log cabin, as we discussed earlier with Count Nikolaus von Zinzendorf and the early settlers, that log cabin served them well. It didn't take long for them to realize that if they were going to welcome more people from Europe to Bethlehem, that they'd have to have a more substantial place to worship and to live. So they began building the Gemeinhaus, which means community house. And the 1741 Gemeinhaus, which is now also the Moravian Museum, located on Church Street, it is a massive and impressive structure, and you've been there. It was the first place of worship in the Saal, that's spelled S-A-A-L. The Saal was on the second floor, and this structure was a 3-story structure. The Saal was on the second floor, and it was the place where they met, where they did their planning, where they worshiped, where they educated. So it was a schoolroom and a church and a town hall. It was all those things. And they began building that very quickly. And the community increased the numbers by the hundreds in just a few years. So the Gemeinhaus was built between 1741 and 1745, and it includes the entire structure. It's a complex, and the structure includes the Gemeinhaus, the Bell House, and the Single Sisters House. The Moravians were set up and sort of divided by choirs. And a choir, it's not a singing choir, it's rather a way to break down the community into, segments. They were separated by sex, they were separated by age, they were separated by marital status. So you had a boys' choir, you had a girls' choir, you had a single women's choir, you had a widow's choir. And they lived and they played and they learned in these choirs. And they were set up so that they could establish a sense of community, with their, common interests and ages and statuses and things like that. So the Moravians valued education for all, women as well as men, and women ascended to leadership positions. And it's one of the most notable and significant things about the Moravian community is that across the board, equality. The Moravian motto is in essentials, unity, in non-essentials, liberty, and in all things, love. There you have it. I mean, when you say it out loud, if you say it too fast, you may not catch it all, but when you slow it down and when you consider every word within that, it's really the basis for goodness and spiritual health and mental health. And if everyone's created equal and if everyone's living equally, what a nice thought, what a nice way to be. And so they did their teaching and their dining, they did their living all within the confines of the Gemeinhaus, and pretty amazing place.
Yeah, it's a great concept, that choir concept, because you're around people who are, same age, same stage of life or what have you. You're kind of doing life with them, and you can talk about any of those struggles or concerns or joys that you'll have in life and sort of bounce them off other people who are sort of in the same boat, who might have a different perspective on something. I think for a community, that's very important. Obviously, they all got together at points as well, hopefully, but I think certainly they did. But these were groups that gained strength from people who were sort of in that same place that they were. So yeah, I remember that very distinctly about the Moravians when I studied them a little bit. So the Gemeinhaus that you mentioned, you took us in that, and what a great museum. And when you brought me up to, is it called the Saal?
Zoll. I'm not going to correct anyone who pronounces it Saul because I've done the same, but I've heard a lot of people who know more than I do pronounce it Zoll. So I'm going to go with Zoll. Saal.
Yeah, when I sat in there, I got that sense of what it must have been like with the community in there worshiping. And really, when you think of they were dealing with 18th century life, and 18th century life, just a regular life, came with a lot of hardships. You had consumption, you had yellow fever threats, you could have just things today that, antibiotics and you're fine, could have killed you. You had childbirth complications. Just life was difficult back then, but to be able to lean into a community must have been amazing.
Yeah, and you had a lot of issues with just basic, sanitary issues, keeping things clean and keeping your water source clean. And we can get into that a little bit too, which led to sort of their love for beer, which began with boiling water. And then what do you do with that water after you boil it? Well, you can make beer out of it. So we can talk about that.
We are.
I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, the struggles were real, and you're talking about Pennsylvania winters, and it's cold, and you have snow, and and it's unpredictable. You don't know what's going to come your way next. So, to have a place, within the Gemeinhaus where they could live, and I think that certainly motivated them to have all those buildings are interconnected. So it limited the amount of time you needed to be outside. You could go from the single sister's house through the bell house and into the place of worship, or to the place where you're going to learn, or the place where you're going to eat. And then the old chapel was built, and that was also connected to this other building. So you had your Zoll, your first meeting room, you had your bell house, you had your single sister's house, and then you have sort of your first official church in the old chapel. And they were all connected, and for good reason, because who wants to be outside in the winter in Pennsylvania?
Agreed. Now, I started to talk about the industrial center. So let me go back to that, because certainly having a thriving industrial center helps with quality of life. It goes along lines with, I believe, the Moravian work ethic and everything along those lines. So let's take a little tour of the industrial village. I mentioned some of the buildings like the mill and the blacksmith and tannery. Can you tell us something about those buildings that were there and some of the ones that are there today?
Sure. So the Colonial Industrial Quarter was the first industrial park in the country. It was located just east of the Monocacy Creek, so right along the creek. And many of those buildings still exist. A few are gone. But in that area, I mean, that's where the tradesmen and the craftsmen did their thing to ensure that they had food to eat and clothing and all the necessities they needed. So you're talking about the grist mill where they would grind grain to make bread and things like that. The blacksmith to make tools, and the tinsmith. The tannery was down there. The butchery was down there. The tailor was down there. The bakery, the saddle makers, they were all down there. The waterworks, an incredible innovation in and of itself, where the Moravians had a system where they would take spring water. And if you've been to the Colonial Industrial Quarter, and you and Kelly were down there, we talked a bit about this, that the waterworks would actually pump water from the spring up the hill through hollowed out wooden logs, and it would pump the water up to a cistern where Central Moravian Church is now located at the corner of Church Street and Main Street. And it was the drinking source. People would come there and get their drinking water. That is an incredible innovation, and it's a National Historic Landmark. It was the first of its kind down there. And it gives you some indication of the impressive nature of the creativity and the innovation that existed in the time. I mean, it was the first of its kind in the country. So the area now has been, as we said, it's been preserved, and it's essential to tell the story. Without the structures, it's hard to really tell the story. You need, the visual part of things. You need to be able to see them. So the Historic Bethlehem Museums and Sites has worked very hard to raise money to make sure that these buildings are standing and are in good condition. So they've done an amazing job of working with the city to ensure that that is the case. So the gristmiller's house, the Lukenbach mill, the tannery, the spring house, and the waterworks are all in great shape. And it's a pleasure to walk through there. And the area gets a lot of traffic, James, especially in the summer during Music Fest. So we have an annual music festival that lasts better part of 2 weeks. And there's a lot of traffic that flows through there. And I know a lot of people do take the time to read the sign and understand that where they are is a pretty significant place in the nation's history. A lot of people are preoccupied with, dancing polkas and drinking beer, which is fine too. But I think it's great when you see that area overflowing and inhabited by so many people. And it, you can't help but wonder what it looked like, back in 1741 and, the early part of the century. It's staggering to think that that was the hub. That was the industrial park. That's where it all happened. And when you walk down there, you can't help but, feel like you're stepping back into history.
Yes, and on our tour, we got to meet the blacksmith in town. His name is Ed.
Ed Land. He's an incredible gentleman, and he works really hard. And he's a great storyteller, as you discovered. And we worked very closely together at a number of special colonial demonstrations. But the Historic Bethlehem Museums and Sites hosts 2 annual festivals at the Burnside Plantation, which is just a little further north along Monocacy Creek, just a beautiful farm in the city. And they host Blueberry Festival, which is in July, and then just had the September Apple Days Festival. And Ed Land does his blacksmithing thing right next to our colonial brewery. So making beer was an important part of Moravian history as well. They had a brewery built almost from the beginning, right behind the Single Brothers house, the Single Brethren's house, which is now, I think, the Department of Music at Moravian University. They made beer there. I mean, they had a wonderful water source in the spring. They had delicious water, and that's an essential part of beer making. They made beer. They sanitized the water. They boiled the water, and they just added grain and hops and yeast, and in about 2 weeks they had beer. And there was a nutritional element too. It was on the dinner table. They made small beer for all ages, 2% alcohol beer that tasted good and was sanitary, was healthy to drink. And we love to tell that story because we like to say that the city was built by steel, but it was also built by beer. And one of the first brewers in town, his name was Johann Sebastian Gundy, and he came to town as a commercial brewer, brewed at the Single Brethren's house, and then built his own brewery. It's still standing. The 1810 Gundy House is on Main Street right next to the Visitor Center. It's a pretty cool story. So we honor him at these 2 festivals, and we brew beer the way it was brewed in the 18th century over a wood fire, and we boil the water and we hand transfer all the liquids, and have turned out some pretty decent product, although it's a bit of a wild card. You don't know what you're going to get with the heat and the wood and the fire and the elements. It's a little strange, but we do attract a nice crowd, and we really enjoy doing it together. So assemble some good friends, some apprentice brewers, and some guys who really know what they're doing, and we have a blast doing it.
Is it possible that I can come out there and sample some of it at some point?
We will make that happen, James.
Well, we went to the Gundy house, and again, you feel history just walking through there, and you can just imagine. I mean, it's a nice little museum in there and a shop. It's a fun place to visit. Now, let's start talking about Bethlehem as the Christmas city. So one of the things I always remember when I went to Moravian is I always remember there was a star up on the mountain, and when you walk past a lot of shops, you'll see what's become known as the Moravian Star. Can you tell us a little bit about that star and what it means for Bethlehem?
Well, as I researched this, and I knew we were going to talk about it, and I needed to, for myself, distinguish between the Bethlehem Star and the Moravian Star. So they are similar in that they're both stars, and they symbolize Christ and the light he brought into the world. But if you look closely at the 2 stars, they are different. I can start by talking about the Moravian Star. It's a 26-point geometric 3-dimensional object. So the Moravian Star, when you look at it, it's a piece of sculpture. It's geometry. It's got the 26 points. And, when it hangs And when it's illuminated, it's beautiful, and it's impressive. The construction of it is an impressive construction. So the Moravians, that's the Moravian star, and the Moravian star, it hangs from the belfry of Central Moravian Church during the holidays. It's inside the sanctuary, lit up and magnificent, and it's all around town. And Moravian University actually, and in a tricky way, but they have pulled it off, managed to make a logo out of what is the Moravian star. And even though it's two-dimensional on stationery letterhead and logos, it looks like they've taken, they've gone to great lengths to make it look three-dimensional. So that's the Moravian star. The Bethlehem star is sort of a traditional 5-point star with sort of 8 little points of light coming out, or shimmering spots. And there are 2 different stars. So the star on the hill of South Mountain, that was established, I believe, early 1900s, was built and was illuminated just for the Christmas season. It was also illuminated during Easter, and they managed to just light up sort of the cross in the middle of it. So you had the star during the Christmas season, and then they would turn that off, and then they would illuminate the star closer to Easter, and you'd have this cross on the hill. Then years later, they decided to just leave the star, lit year round, which I think was a great decision. So there's 2 sides of the star. You can look at it if you're facing south, and you can look at it if you're on the other side of the mountain facing north, and it can be seen by about 20 miles away. So it's very impressive, and it's beautiful. It's up on the hill, and everyone can see it. It's at like the highest point of Bethlehem, and it's a really impressive structure.
Yeah, and it's something that we always look for. And I remember being fascinated by all the white lights that I saw around my campus, and just really a sense of a old-fashioned, simple sort of a Christmas. And usually at Christmas time, I was studying for finals, or I should have been at least studying for finals, and not able to totally absorb it. But over the years, we've come to visit Bethlehem more frequently at Christmas time, and just taken aback at how it's really, not to say anything bad about when I was there, but I will say that it is so much better today. So much, I don't know, I just get a real sense of Christmas when I'm there, and just what they've done with the city, how really beautiful it is. But it took, over the years, I think I read somewhere in 1937 that Bethlehem was officially declared Christmas city. They made some sort of an announcement or edict or what have you. But how, over the years, from that simple Moravian village to what it is today, how did it evolve?
Well, I think it's important to note that what you were just talking about, I don't know too much of the detail about how that happened. I mean, to me, it seems inevitable that it would have been named the Christmas city, with all the things that you just described and all the things that we've been talking about, from its early origins and the naming of the city, and just the fact that, year round, even if it's, July or May, you walk downtown and you're in the Christmas city. I mean, there are white lights in the windows, and there are Moravian stars that are hanging, and the trees are lit up with white lights, and you can't help but recognize and acknowledge Central Moravian Church in the corner and all that means to the city, and you just can't help it. You are consumed and surrounded by a Christmas spirit, Moravian spirit, and a Christmas spirit. In the 70s, there was a notion that perhaps it'd be a good idea, with urban renewal, to transform the city and to modernize the city and to take it in a direction that, looking back, would have been a big mistake. So the mayor at the time, Gordon Maurer, was instrumental in saying, I don't think that that's the right way to go. I think the right way to go would be to preserve the historic aspect and perhaps build that up, and cobblestone streets and Z-brick walkways and gas lights. And I can't even imagine if that hadn't been done. I mean, we owe him a huge debt of gratitude, and he has been recognized. And it's well known that he was instrumental in preserving it and preserving that special aspect of the Christmas city. Without that, who knows what it would look like? But we know what it looks like now, and what it looks like now is a pretty beautiful, quaint, comfortable, safe space that is a very popular place to be, especially around the holidays. So as soon as Thanksgiving wraps up, it's time for the historic turkey trot down along the Colonial Industrial Quarter, which is a nice 5K race and fun walk. And families have really, locked into the tradition of coming to Bethlehem, participating in that race, and maybe starting their holiday shopping. And there are a number of amazing activities and events that we have downtown. I would say that right around that time is really when things start to heat up. But prior to that, about the week before, Historic Bethlehem Museums and Sites hosts a Trees of Historic Bethlehem event where Bethlehem Garden Club volunteers go around and decorate a number of trees, and they have different themes from year to year. And you can go to the Kemmerer Museum, which is located on New Street. You can go to the Moravian Museum, which is located inside the Gemeinhaus we talked about earlier. You can go to the Lukenbach Mill and see these incredible, beautiful tree displays at these different museums. There's also two very popular and beautiful Christmas nativity puts scenes that emerge that time of year. One is in the Christian Education Building, which is where my family used to go every Christmas. And, the lights would pop up and they would tell the story of the birth of Christ and the wise men. And it's beautifully constructed by Central Moravian Church. And there's another one that was built by a good friend of mine, Jim Wilden. His Christmas nativity put scene is located inside the Single Sisters house. And it's incredible, the lengths that this guy has gone to construct this puts. And he also has a to-scale model of the Colonial Industrial Quarter and all the significant buildings of historic Bethlehem. So if you want to get sort of a bird's eye view of downtown Bethlehem and the historic district, stop by the Moravian Museum and head over to the Single Sisters house and check out the puts over there. It's absolutely incredible.
That's cool. First for our listeners, can you describe what a putz is?
I'm glad you asked, because I thought I should describe what this is. So the word putz, P-U-T-Z, is German for decorate or to place. And a putz scene is essentially miniature figurines around a miniature manger, perhaps including Mary and Joseph and the Christ child and the wise men. And it just tells the nativity story. So it could be something that you just place under your tree. That could be a nativity scene or a putz. But the two that I just described, the one at the Christian Education Building connected to Moravian Academy, and the one that Jim Wilden built in the Single Sisters house, are out of this world. And they're beautifully constructed. There are angels in the sky. There's music. There's the narration that tells the story and breaks it down. And it's rather solemn and entertaining and just quite beautiful, and just sets up the Christmas season in a magical way. And I look forward to hosting it. My wife and I will go over there and host the puts and draw the curtain and press play and start the program. And it helps to get you in the spirit of the season for sure.
I love that. Now, when I was a freshman at Moravian College, I had tickets for my family to go see the Vespers at Central Moravian Church. And I brought up my grandparents and my parents and my aunt, and we got all these tickets. I don't know how I did it as a freshman, but I did. And we just loved it. It was such a beautiful service. It was wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit about the Vespers?
Yeah, as you mentioned, the Vespers series, the holiday music series, is set up by Moravian University. And I think the planning for it begins as soon as the last one ends. So Moravian University hosts with their choir and their student body, puts on an incredible Christmas Vespers program, which includes holiday music and liturgy, and also it's a candlelit vigil. So you have an entire congregation of about 1,000 people singing and participating in the spirit of Christmas and holding handmade beeswax candles, which again symbolize the light of Christ in the world. And then at the bottom, they have this red paper ribbon gather that helps to keep the hot beeswax off your hand, but symbolizes the blood of Christ as well. So you can just imagine a sanctuary full of people singing in unison with candlelight. Again, you just can't help but get into the Christmas spirit. And if you've attended it, great, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, I invite you to. There's a number of these Christmas Vespers throughout the month of December. that are absolutely incredible. And that's at Central Moravian Church in the sanctuary, the big house.
The big house. That is a beautiful church. And when we were down in the industrial quarter, we looked up and saw the top of Central Moravian Church. Kelly took some pictures of it from down by the, I guess it was the tannery or something like that. And it was just so beautiful, so magnificent. Do you know, this isn't a quiz or anything like that, but do you happen to know when the Central Moravian building that's there now was built?
Yeah, the sanctuary was completed in 1806. And it's an impressive structure to this day. I mean, the inside it's straightforward, it's clean, it's got clean lines. We don't get bogged down in the dogma. It's about being together. It's about the sense of community. It's about the togetherness. It's about doing what you can within the community to make it better. If you can make it to church every Sunday, that's wonderful. But if you can't be there for a couple of weeks, the last thing you want is, that look, where you been? Haven't seen you in a while. You don't need the guilt, and it's okay. We just like to see you there. And if you can't go to church, but you want to participate in a program, if you want to, host Sunday school or help out with the youth group or participate in the food pantry or, the clothing bank or, that's the important stuff. Galvanizing and bringing the community together in a sense of fellowship. Those are the important things. So that's what we believe in. That's what we maintain.
I think when the decision was made back in the 70s to really lean into the history of the city and keep that and build off the history, that the Moravian influence hasn't been lost in the sauce, which is important. And sort of that simple faith, community, hardworking, working together is really still shining there. And when, as I mentioned before, Kelly and I go to Bethlehem pretty much every Christmas time now. And when we walk down by we have a really nice dinner at the Hotel Bethlehem, by the way, really good dinner. It's a very historic hotel in and of itself. But when we walk down in that old side of Bethlehem and we see the candles in the windows and we see activity, people coming in and out of the Central Moravian Church, and we heard carol singers in the street, and we saw horses and carriages and the sounds and the lantern lights and the little shops decorated and the Moravian stars hanging in the window. It just brings you to the season. It's just a wonderful experience. I'm so glad that the Central Moravian Church has remained very active there and part of the community.
Yeah, for sure. And the picture that you painted there was a perfect one. I mean, there is something special about sitting in the tap room at the Hotel Bethlehem, looking out the windows behind you onto Main Street and seeing the things you described, carriage rides and snow falling, and you're looking at the lights of these historic structures that have been beautifully maintained and candles in the windows. And there are some built-in traditions the city has adopted. The Downtown Bethlehem Association also has a live Advent calendar, which is a great event. This series is at the Gundy House, the home of Johann Sebastian Gundy, the brewer who I talked about earlier. It's cool. At the beginning of the month of December, during Advent, in the evening, you knock on the front door, and then representatives from the Downtown Bethlehem Merchants, Downtown Bethlehem Association emerge and deliver a program, a holiday message. Maybe it's a song, maybe it's a skit, and then distribute treats, hot chocolate, cookies, goodies of some kind. And it's just a nice coming together in an historic place at a special time. And that's a really nice built-in tradition that the city offers. I love it. I love the tree lighting ceremony. Beginning of the month is also spectacular. We mentioned the nativity put scenes, holiday shopping. It's commercial, but it's special. It's just nice to know that you can go from place to place and browse and look and hear the music. There's Christmas music piped in on the speakers on Main Street. You just captivated by it all, and it's really an amazing place to be. Also, December 9th, I believe it's December 9th this year, the New Bethany Ministries has a Luminaria program, which are candles. You buy little kits, and they are trying to raise money to fight poverty and hunger and homelessness in Bethlehem. It's also a beautiful Bethlehem tradition. So the Luminarias You buy these little bags with sand and a candle inside, and you place them outside of your home. And it does a really nice job of lighting up the neighborhood and sort of connecting the neighborhood, because the entire neighborhood, downtown area is illuminated by these beautiful lights. And my wife, Pamela, and I like to walk down there and check those out. And it does help to get you in the spirit of things for sure. It's inevitable. You can't help but be caught up on all of it.
It is so interesting. And I want to back up a little, just a drop is, during our tour that you took us on, you took us to an old cemetery that is in town. And what is the name of that cemetery?
God's Acre.
God's Acre. And we saw some very old gravestones there from really people who made up the Bethlehem community over the years, and some of them dating back to the 1700s. It was quite interesting if you're an historian who is interested in those things. But I also wanted to talk about the Christkindlmarkt. I can probably talk a lot about it myself because we go every year. We always seem to get a nutcracker too. We always get one of those nice nutcrackers. We set it off as a mission, and now our mantelpiece is almost out of room because it was so nice. But can you tell us a little about that, Craig?
Yeah, the Christkindlmarkt program actually is offered by ArtsQuest, which is it's an art and music organization, promotes the arts. They began the Christkindlmarkt, which is a large heated tent traditional Christmas market. When it started, the Christkindlmarkt event and program began right at the base of Spring Street, not far from the Colonial Industrial Quarter, and it was there for a number of years. And then when they built the Steel Stacks campus on the south side, right sort of in the shadow of and footprint of the former Bethlehem steel blast furnaces, that's where Christkindlmarkt is now. They've moved the operation over to the south side, but they've done amazing things over at ArtsQuest, and to accommodate everyone who has varied interests. They built an ice skating rink right there where the Levitt Pavilion is, again right in the shadow and footprint of the blast furnaces. So you can go ice skating, you can go over to Christkindlmarkt, do some Christmas shopping, get something to eat. It's a fantastic event, and it's become very, very popular over there. And that Steel Stacks campus and what they've done over there and what they do year round, it's a hub for some great concerts. It's a fantastic place just to go over and explore and experience the Bethlehem steel blast furnaces up close and personal. You can walk the Hoover Mason trestle, which runs east to west, right in front of the blast furnaces. You can practically reach out and touch them, which growing up here, you couldn't get too close to those things. It was dangerous, for one thing, but they've done a terrific job of maintaining and preserving those so that you can reflect and appreciate the industry that was such a big part of building up Bethlehem as well, and a big part of our history.
These furnaces go back many years, but they are magnificent. It's almost like, I can't explain it, this gargantuan old factory, preserved right in front of us. And you just think of the tens of thousands of workers whose lives revolved around that factory, and how important it was to them, and what kind of jobs they had and what they were thinking. And when I stand there and look at it, I can't get enough of it. We walked on that little catwalk or whatever you call it, and took photos from there, and it was just really cool. So if you go out to the Christkindlmarkt, is it Christkindlmarkt or Market?
I believe Christkindlmarkt. You just don't pronounce the last part.
Okay. And either way, it doesn't matter. It's there and it's great.
It's hard to spell, right?
It's hard to spell. Anyway, so I wanted to ask you, I heard, or I understand, that there's something called World Heritage Sites, and that Bethlehem, Pennsylvania may possibly have some connection in the future to this. Could you talk about that?
Sure. In February, and this has been a long process, 2 decades in the making, Historic Moravian Bethlehem has been nominated by the U.S. government. On February 1st, we were nominated to be included as a World Heritage Site. So the idea is for Historic Moravian Bethlehem to join Grace Hill in Northern Ireland and Herrenhut in Germany, the three would join an existing World Heritage Site in Christiansfeld, Denmark, to become one. So it would be a cluster. The cluster of these historic Moravian sites would become a World Heritage Site. And all of those places were settlements of the early Moravians as they fled Moravia and Bohemia to escape religious persecution. It's rather significant. There's only two World Heritage Sites in the state of Pennsylvania. One is Independence Hall in Philadelphia, and the other is Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water in Fayette County in the western part of the state. So it's incredible. We're going through the selection process right now. We had a number of assessors visit and take a close look at the historic structures, the architecture, the cultural significance of the Moravians, and make a determination. We should know by spring 2024 or early summer what they decide, but we're hopeful that everything works out in our favor. We've done all we can. The US government has nominated us. That in and of itself is very impressive, and we're all very, very proud of that, to have gotten that far. The fact that they would recognize that we should be considered as a World Heritage Site makes us very proud. So our fingers are crossed, and we're hopeful that that all comes together. And it would mean, it would put us on the world stage. It would give us international significance and would certainly attract more attention, more tourists, more people to visit our amazing city. That would just, fill my heart. It would be an incredible accomplishment. So we're hopeful that that all works out for us.
And I know regardless of whatever happens, and my fingers are crossed too, I just believe Bethlehem's going to stay true to itself and its history. I think that's the most important key to all this. And I think that'd be wonderful because there's such a rich history. And for me, I'm only 80 miles away, 75 miles away from Bethlehem. And so it's a place that I can go and explore. I know when we walk around at Christmas time, not only do we see the Christmas decoration, but there's all those nice little blue signs that have this house stood here and this stood here, and the Sun Inn, which is a place we love to go visit when we're there to have a meal. That's a historic building. There's so many historic buildings around. I remember one that I did a little internship when I was in college, and this building, next to the building were a bunch of old homes, and a lot of them had what are called boot scrapes on the front porch. So people would just scrape the horse manure or whatever's on their boots before they walked into the house. And I just remembered, some people would think, so what? I just find that so cool. It is so interesting, and so many things are. And I want to conclude with this, Craig. When we took the tour with you, and when I've spoken with you on the phone before, and as I speak now, you have this tremendous passion for Bethlehem and for the Moravian Church. What is it at the core of you that is causing that to happen?
Well, I think it begins with, I've used the word probably a dozen times, the sense of community. I think when I was not a member of Central Moravian Church, I met my wife. We were married at Central Church. From the start, I had a sense of the community. You just always had a sense that everybody who lived here was proud and happy to be here and wanted to remain here. And, you have opportunities to go other places and do other things. And I've been other places. I've seen other things. There's just something about, there are green things. There are green spaces. You're surrounded by rivers and creeks and, little pockets of nature. There are trails to walk. And there's the historic aspect is another amazing thing. I mean, when you look at it closely and when you discover a bit about the history behind who settled here, why they settled here, and what motivated them to make it their home, you can't help but get caught up in some of that, and those community connections I've made over the years, whether it's my involvement at Central Moravian Church or my involvement working at the local newspaper a few years ago, or, sharing a field with a bunch of guys that you still call friends, and those guys are now becoming friends of your kids. It's a rare and special thing. And people, they grow up here. Some people move away, they come back, they're looking for what they have right here in Bethlehem. I think that's it. It's a comfortable, peaceful place to be, and we have an active downtown, and and a place that I'm proud to call home.
Well, that's a really good answer. And that sort of explains to our listeners why we selected you to come on our show to tell the amazing history of Bethlehem, Christmas City, and why it's so important for people to really go visit just for fun at Christmas or any time of the year, just to experience Bethlehem, Christmas City. So, Craig, how can people find out more about Bethlehem and Central Moravian Church and what goes on there, particularly at Christmas time?
Yeah, please visit the Central Moravian Church website, centralmoravianchurch.org. It has all the information about the Moravians, all the information about our services year-round, not only Christmas, but year-round, and the programs that we offer in the community. And we are deeply committed to the mission of maintaining and building a strong community. You can find out more there. If you're interested in finding out more about the history of Bethlehem, go to historicbethlehem.org, and you can learn all about the museums and sites that organization works so hard to preserve. You can also go to moravian.edu to learn more about Moravian University and the programs that they offer. And we're also deeply connected in all of this. I mean, the entities of the city and the church and the university, we've all worked very closely and very hard to preserve and to promote the good things that are going on here in Bethlehem. So check out those websites and learn more about them there.
Well, Craig, this has been a lot of fun. And thank you so much for being a guest and for taking the time last month to take us around. It was supposed to pour that day. It was supposed to pour and the rain never came that day. And we were so thankful. And we just had such a good time. I said to Kelly, some of our podcasts were able to go out on site and investigate ahead of time and talk to our guests. And we're so glad we did this one because you're just a good guy. And keep up the good work because you're doing a great job promoting the city that you love and the church that you love.
Thank you, James. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the time.
Okay, Craig, have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Your History, Your Story. You can connect with us on Facebook and YouTube at Your History, Your Story, or on Instagram and Twitter at YHYS Podcast. We'd love to hear from you if you have any questions, comments, or a story to tell. Be well and God bless.